John, there is a disturbing thing happening with teenagers and with COVID that you've been talking about on your show. And James, our producer, sent us an article on the loneliness issue and teen mental health with this. It's scary.
Yeah, if you could construct a way to torture teenagers, it would be to isolate them, put them in a house with their family for a year or more, and force them to connect via social media, which are outlets that we know exacerbate anxiety, depression, these things, make people feel less than, make people just accelerate this disconnection, man. And it's an absolute mess, Dave. It's a mess.
So the kids not being back in the classroom is causing well, I mean, we're seeing suicides increase, we're seeing loneliness increase, we're seeing because the human development requires interaction with other humans, and social media is not interaction.
No, and especially with kids, especially with teenagers in middle school, they are figuring out who they are in relationship with other people. And when you take that off, it is just like cutting the string on a balloon, and it's off, right? There's just no way to ground when it's just you and a screen. And then you go through these curated images of what other people are supposedly doing, what their lives are supposedly like, and it makes you feel less than and more isolated.
Well, and then people have digital courage, and so they become bullies and mean and other stuff.
Here's another interesting thing. When you and I were kids and we ran into a real bully, or we are one ourselves, and somebody mouthed off to us, that hurt. And then we went about our day, and we went with our friends, and there's just a natural cycle to that. When it's in black and white text,
it stays forever.
You read over and over, and you go back to it, and you go back to it, and it re-injures and re-injures. That's another thing. If you lost a grandparent from...
so you've got a generation that wasn't connected enough with humans as it was, but on top of that, you just took them completely and stuck them in a house.
That's right.
With COVID. And then they're not going back to the classroom. And so the teachers' unions are screwing these kids.
Man, I just can't I can't find the data, the science that supports keeping these kids by themselves. Even our kid has been back in a regular public school. They got to wear masks, got to do these things, but man, he gets to interact with other kids, and he gets to be around other kids. Gets to run around, and they're making up new games, but they're with other people. And I'm hearing stories about. Reading stories about teachers' unions trying to say, yeah, we'll let them back, but why we're going to replace the air conditioning complexes, or we've got to fill in the blank, and using these moments to try to get other gains for the teachers. Man, my wife's a teacher. I'm from teachers. I've been a teacher. I'm all about teachers, but it's all about these kids. It is about these kids at the end of the day. That's why we are teachers. That's why I was a teacher. My wife's a teacher, because we're about these kids, and these kids are dying on the vine, Dave. Every mental health professional I know is predicting a collapse of these kids when they go back, because they've just been separate for so long, and it's just a mess.
One of the things we've talked about, and the data is there, and it's been there for years. I remember reading it a long time ago, and then you reminded me of it the other day, that teens need physical proximity to figure out who they are.
Right.
And they even... The thing, if you've never heard this before, it's going to sound strange to you, but even their heartbeats start to regulate off of each other.
Yeah, their eyes look at each other.
They not only pick up the same words and vernacular and those kinds of things, but literally the physiology of their bodies tend to connect.
Yes,
and when you don't have that, it's not developing properly.
That's exactly right. And you don't get that teacher that just puts that hand on the shoulder, that just winks at the kid in the hallway. We used to call it accidental community, where you, as a teacher, you just watch for that one kid who's got his heads down, who's not getting it at home, who's not getting it, who's getting beat up by his older brother, who's struggling on the bus, whatever the thing is. And it's those little touch points that a teacher can provide, that school counselor, that school principal, that coach can provide.
It's not the academics.
No.
It's the relational quality.
Yes. Yeah. You can get
socialization.
We can transfer information. That's the easy part. It's talking to the teacher that's showing you, man, you should see my son coming home from history. He is learning the narrative, these stories, and they've come alive, and he's asking questions at home that I never dreamed a 10-year-old would ask. That's because he's got a relationship with somebody that he trusts who's given him this information, right? And he could read a book. It would go in one ear and out the other, but this teacher's helping to come alive in him, right? And so all I have to say is, man, where you can, find ways to let your kids be around other kids. Find ways to connect with your kids. Find ways to get them out with other children running around.
This is far more dangerous than the virus. I think it is. That's a statement I made.
Yeah, I can't see a way that it's not, Dave. I have not been compelled by the data on kids.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
The first time I heard you talk was you talked about screens before COVID.
Before COVID,
I mean, I don't know, 3-4 years ago I heard you do a talk, and you were talking about the damage, not necessarily from the bullying's part of it, but not necessarily from that, but the damage that this lack of physical proximity to create socialization and proper development in a child 7 to 27 years old.
Think of it this way. Depending on what stats you read, it's 70 to 90% of communication is nonverbal, right? And so when you export all of your interaction with somebody to zeros and ones, to text messages, you're communicating 20, 30%. You're missing shoulder movement and body posture and eye crinkles and this syncing up that we do together, right? So, I have not seen any data that said kids don't need to be back in schools, that COVID's just wiping out kids. In fact, it's been the opposite. It's taken out folks who are older, who are not in good health, right, who have other things going on. Now, of course, there's the outliers. We hear about those.
So are you seeing the mental health community starting to raise this banner?
They've been doing it for a year.
All along.
All along.
But just they weren't getting a platform.
There is no platform. And everybody's so busy throwing things up online just so they could see folks, right? Because they knew this crisis was going to emerge. And this is the other thing. Think about if you had someone that you love, your grandparent died in a car wreck. The last thing you're going to do is go watch anything that has to do with car wrecks until you heal. And if your grandparent passed away from COVID, or you have someone you love passed away from COVID, every news story, everything's about COVID. So these kids are just looping on this all day long. And those loops just become that anxiety. When you can't take that anxiety anymore, that's when that weight just takes over you. That's when you just sit back and you fade back, and we call that depression. That's when you just unplug from the world, man. And we're just watching it happen with kid after kid after kid after kid. And at some point, whether you got to run around and play outside, I don't care how you have to do it, you got to get your kids in proximity to other kids. You have to, Dave.
Even when it comes to church, the Bible says, don't forsake the gathering of the believers.
Figure it out. I've heard of churches meeting in people's backyard, or whatever you got to do.
You need to be in proximity.
Figure it out.
Of human beings.
Right.
Human beings need relationship to function properly.
Got to.
It is not good that man be alone. And this is what we're seeing. And we're seeing this in careers. We're seeing it in businesses. We're seeing it with this article. Where was this article out of?
Psychology Today.
Psychology Today on the loneliness and depression and suicide rate of teens.
Yeah, it's really tough, man. And even this, let's say you're in a city, in a town where you just can't, or you live in a highly compressed city. That means you're going to have to go over the top being engaged with your kid.
Yeah.
You're going to have to put your electronics away, moms and dads, and you're going to have to plug in. You're going to have to figure out how to kick a soccer ball in your living room. You have to do something.
The first 30 days binge watching Netflix was okay.
It's over.
It's not okay
Unplug
anymore.
everything now.
It's not okay anymore. These screens are killing you.
Find ways to engage with your kids.